Welcome to Building the Future. I'm your host, Kevin Horick. You can check out new episodes of the show every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. If you missed an episode or want to get more information about the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com. SoupX, the Startup Expo, North America's premier startup conference, is March 6th and 7th, 2017, in sunny Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Affordably priced, SoupX is a 2-day international conference featuring workshops, panels, speeches, a $50,000 startup competition, and over 100 exhibitors. For more information, go to sup-x.org. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Mike Lingle. He's an entrepreneur and mentor. Mike, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much, Kevin. It's great to be back. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, I love having you on the show, and the listeners seem to really enjoy what we have always kind of talked about. So I thought, let's have you back. So I think maybe just for people that don't know who you are, let's maybe give them a kind of a quick overview again of who you are and kind of what you're doing currently, and they can kind of go back to our previous episodes online to listen to kind of a little bit more in detail, but kind of maybe just give them a quick overview of kind of what you're up to now from kind of the Venture Hive and the Tonic Studio side of things.
Yeah, sure. So I'm an entrepreneur. I started a bunch of companies all in kind of the same space. It was presentations. So basically doing networked versions of PowerPoint before PowerPoint was networked. And we eventually moved that into the cloud, and started a company called SlideRocket, raised some money. That company ended up bringing in a CEO from Salesforce.com who got the company sold to VMware. So it was great for everyone who was involved. I was in New York for a long time doing the startup thing, and then moved down to Miami and got plugged into the startup scene down there, and really felt like I could help. There's not a ton of people in Miami who've been through that cycle before, but there's a lot of entrepreneurs trying to start stuff. So I got started consulting with entrepreneurs both in Miami and New York, and that eventually led to mentoring at an accelerator in Miami called Venture Hive. And we just started another cohort of companies in the past couple of weeks. We're doing a 12-week program, and the main goal is really making sure the entrepreneurs have the tools they need to succeed, regardless of what happens to this particular company. I don't mean to sound so harsh about it. Obviously, we want their current companies to succeed.
Sure.
But those of us with some gray hair know that, you get another chance at bat eventually.
Sure.
But we want to make sure that they're really the best entrepreneurs they can be.
I got you.
In addition, I do a bunch of consulting and mentoring with, my own roster of startups. And I was telling you before the show, I feel kind of like a therapist. Like I have office hours every day with just calls or meetings, every hour with different entrepreneurs. Some of them from the Venture Hive Accelerator, some of them I'm working with on my own. And then sometimes with companies, I'll do deep dives and help them with sales or marketing or strategy or, get a little more in depth. I also do a lot of helping entrepreneurs through negotiations, strategy negotiations, like, how do you get what you want when other people are involved, and how do you make sure that they're getting what they need to?
Yeah, so it's fair for everybody, right?
The fun stuff. Right.
Also, some of the most important stuff.
Yeah, it's a challenge sometimes.
Sure. So I'm curious, you mentioned kind of about Venture Hive and the tools that you kind of are teaching people. Do you maybe want to kind of cover loosely kind of like what does that really mean? Like what type of stuff do you kind of teach people, and what kind of tools do you kind of give them?
Right. So, and it's funny, it sort of goes back. I started my first company at 25. I did not have an MBA, but I had customers, and I was making money.
Right.
And I started making enough money that I started hiring people, and it worked well for a while when the economy was doing well, but then when 2000 hit and the dot-com crash came, the tide went out, and my boat had a lot of holes in the bottom of it.
Got you.
So I ended up having to lay a bunch of people off. And the biggest problem was I really didn't know how to run a business. Like I said, it worked when things were good, but the company my business partner and I were building didn't work when things were bad. And it turned out we were way out over our skis, but didn't even realize it, you know?
Sure. No, that makes sense.
And so in working with entrepreneurs, I find a lot of people in the same situation where it would really help to have a crash course on, you know, how to run a business, first of all, because it's very different than whatever the skill is that these people have.
Sure.
You know, I was doing custom development for big corporations, and that was my skill, but I also had to learn how to run a business and hire people and manage teams and, you know, get jobs done. And there's a whole bunch of extra stuff that comes along with running a business that, you know, it's important for people to learn. But once you're in motion, you don't really have time to stop and go get an MBA.
Totally.
And then two, I think, you know, the mentoring really helps. Like the MBA is great, and there's a lot of case studies, but, you know, in our program, you can actually bring your business into the program, and we'll open it up through weekly mentoring sessions and really, you know, customize the experience towards you and what you're going through, right?
Oh, that's awesome.
So if you're trying to get an idea off, yeah. So, and it's great. Like if you're trying to get an idea off the ground, we'll help you do that. If you're already in motion and you have customers and you're trying to scale, we'll help you do that. So it's this combination of like the basics along with customize, get in there and figure out your specific issues.
No, that makes sense.
You know, and what I've found is even after all the time that I've spent learning businesses, you know, when I got started with Venture Hive, I went back and went through the curriculum and I relayed a lot of my own foundation because I've done it, I've been successful, but I never really, you know, in a formal way learned everything I needed to learn. So it's actually been a great experience for me. Plus I get to watch it through a bunch of other companies' eyes. Like it's kind of a magical experience for me mentoring because I'm watching, you know, 15 companies at a time work through their own issues. So I learn a lot through their eyes.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. And like in some ways I think, like obviously like I went to university and stuff too, but in some ways I think you learn more actually in the trenches doing this stuff than you ever do in school. And I'm not saying you shouldn't go to school. It's just, I don't think you need to go to like, or have a degree to be successful in especially in this space, right? Like you can learn this stuff as you go. And in some cases, it's almost you learn more in the field doing it than you do potentially in school.
Yes. I don't actually have a degree. You know, I wanted to be an architect.
Right.
And so I was working for architecture firms, and it was really going to be a long road. And, you know, it was sort of a bad combination of it was going to take a really long time. I wasn't going to get to do anything cool for a long time, and I wasn't going to make any money.
Sure. You
know, and what finally got me out of architecture was I think I was making like, I don't know, $10 an hour or something. I went to the architect who ran the firm, and I said I wanted $12 an hour, $14 an hour. And he was like, for that, I can get a licensed architect in who's been practicing for 10 years. And I was like, well, then I quit because like, I don't want to put all that work in and only be making $14 an hour versus, you know, that's with a license and with more school versus, you know, software, I could just show up and I was good and I could just do it.
No, totally. I
agree. Yeah.
Yeah, like I
guess
guess
in a short amount of time, I was doing super high profile projects, and like we did kiosks for IBM and Pfizer. Like I had a kiosk in the window of the world headquarters at Pfizer on 42nd Street.
That's awesome.
Those were like things I could go look at, you know?
Sure.
And it was like, I did this, I built this.
Yeah, no, totally.
That's great.
And like I went to university and just took like one of their kind of programming courses, but it wasn't like, I don't have a degree either. Like I think it came out with like a diploma. Right. I don't even remember what it was called. Like I remember what the program is called, but like I think it's just proof, right? Like so many people are like, you need a degree in this or that. It's like, well, there's a lot of people that are successful doing this stuff that don't have it, right? And I guess the two of us are proof of that. So I think that's important to kind of mention to kind of the listener, right? I think you can learn a lot of this stuff, and there's books on it, and there's a lot of stuff online, and there's so much of this stuff, right? And there's so many people trying to create great content around this, and I kind of love what you guys are doing with the Venture Hive space, because you're almost like tailoring a MBA to what they need, instead of just going to university and taking one that kind of teaches you general stuff, right? Which is good. It's in a different approach, right? And one's not better than the other. It's just there's options, right? And people should consider all their options and whatever works for them.
Right, and I think so I have two things to say.
Sure.
I want to just say the flip side is I don't think I don't think it works to go out into the world knowing nothing and,
fair.
Essentially just making it up as you go along.
That's fair.
So I think it is important to get some kind of educational foundation. It doesn't have to be a degree, but you do have to know what you're doing and be able to work with other people and be able to deliver what you say you're going to deliver.
Fair enough, yeah.
So I think that's where a program like Venture Hive is important. It is a foundation, and there is a real curriculum there. And the other thing I would say is we live in the golden age of content, right? Like what's happening right now is the internet has figured out that the way to succeed is to provide your best knowledge for free.
Yep.
Right? So if you want to learn something, it's out there, and you can learn the best way to do it. And then the trick for me is I can't just read about it, I have to go practice it. And that's where I really like the consulting. That's where I really like the mentoring. A lot of the consulting for me is learning something new and then getting paid to implement it.
Right.
And a lot of the mentoring is learning from watching people implement stuff and seeing how it goes, so that I'm constantly, not just learning, but also getting that experience both from myself and from other people. And that's how I get better and better and better.
Yeah, and I love how, like, even somebody like yourself is still learning, right? I think that's important to mention, that, like, you've been successful, but you're still learning. And I think the other thing that I find really interesting, and I've even done it with you, is, like, I wrote to you, I don't know, a month or two ago about, like, I'm looking for books in these subject areas, like, what do you recommend? And you sent me back, like, you should read these books. And I think, like, just networking with people that can provide resources where it's just like a quick email or a quick, like, hey, I'm looking to learn more about like this specific thing. What do you think? Right. And, I've read both of the books that you suggested to me, and like, they were awesome. Right. And so I think it's super important to mention kind of that as well. Right. That, like you mentioned, there's so much content out there that it's like almost either free or paid. Stuff. Right.
Yep.
So, but I'm curious. Maybe go ahead. Sorry.
Actually, let me say one other thing.
Sure.
The other thing I will say is, like, stuff changes so fast. I took 3 years off to do music.
Yep.
And when I came back into the tech world, like, the tech world had changed.
Sure.
Just in 3 years. So it took a minute to ramp back up into, like, what's going on now. So I think more than ever, it's important to just constantly be learning.
Yeah. No, totally. That makes a lot of sense, and I totally kind of agree with you, and I think it kind of is a decent segue into what we kind of wanted to talk about today. And I think you've been writing a bunch of blog posts over the last little while, and I found a lot of value in them personally, and so I thought we should kind of maybe do a show, or this show, kind of around kind of what you've been writing about recently, and stuff that I've even been kind of dealing with in my own kind of day job, and that's kind of around pricing and kind of sales. And I think, obviously those are hugely important and completely related to each other. And so you wrote a really interesting post kind of about how you should be teaching instead of kind of just like hardcore selling to people. And so I was kind of interested to know maybe do you want to kind of give kind of an overview of your view on kind of, teaching working better than just kind of constantly just hardcore selling to people?
Yeah. And I think it ties back into that concept of the golden age of content.
Mm-hmm.
I think what we've learned is that giving away our best content for free leads to opportunities.
Sure, totally.
So, I can give away my knowledge, but where people really benefit, or some subset of people really benefit, is an actual, getting into some kind of mentoring or consulting arrangement with me.
Sure.
But if they get what they need out of my free content, that's fine with me too. I have enough people who bubble up to the surface from the free stuff I put out. And so I think it's the same, and that's essentially a marketing thing. I'm pushing it out onto the web, people find it, or I'm pushing it out to an email list, people read it, and then some number of them come to me. And I've found I get all kinds of comments, both from people I know and from people I don't know online, but also in real life.
Sure.
I was at a party the other night, and someone realized that I was the person whose newsletter they've been reading. And they were like, "Oh, that's you." And we started talking about the newsletter.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I think, the goal is to just keep pushing out great content, right? And that works really well for marketing.
Yes.
And I guess the point here is that also works really well for sales. I built a lot of my career off of sales. I was always selling into big companies. And so, the worst moment in sales is when someone's stalled, you have a potential sale and stalled, and you reach out to them and say, "Are you ready to buy yet?" Right? And there's, I think there was a software commercial that made fun of that. It was like, "How much software do you want to buy?"
Yeah, I remember that.
Right, and the answer is always zero. Like, if you're reaching out to someone and just saying, "Are you ready to buy yet?" the answer is probably no.
Sure.
Versus if you reach out to them and say, "Hey, this is probably interesting to you," you remind them that you exist, you give them something of value, and they know you've got your proposal sitting on their desk, so they're going to think of you, and maybe that moves the deal forward. So that's kind of the basic idea. And then from there, you get into, why does someone want to talk to you? If I'm selling something, I'm likely going to have to talk to that person, either through my web copy and my marketing, or in person, either on the phone or in a meeting.
Right.
And why does that person want to engage with me? So on the web, you have a strategy of giving away content. I use a bunch of, I use Instapage, which is like a landing page site.
Yep. And
they give away a bunch of information on building your email list, because that's what a lot of people use landing pages for. Right? So that content that they generate pulls me in, and in the process of telling me how to build their email list, they introduce me to the need for landing page software to build that list.
Sure.
So that works on the web, but what happens when you need to talk to someone in person? The instinct is, I want to get a meeting with you, and then I want to show up and I want to tell you all about myself. And it turns out people don't really like that. So kind of the first generation was something called spin selling, which is more of a conversational thing where you really try to understand what's going on with the customer and then tailor the pitch to them. And I used a version of that for a long time that worked pretty well. And what we finally ended up with was pitch deck, where we had the second slide was a list of problems that customers had.
Okay.
And I would just let them read the slide, and then they would, ask them to tell me which, 2 or 3 of those were the most painful for them. And then I could structure the rest of the pitch around that.
Interesting.
And I think where some sales pitches fall apart is either the salesperson just talks about themselves and goes through every detail, and that's really annoying and it takes a really long time. Or, sometimes it can turn into feeling a little bit like an inquisition,
right?
Where the salesperson shows up and starts asking all these questions, and it's like, I don't want to answer all these questions. I just want to know how you can help my business.
Right.
So having that slide about the pain points right at the beginning kind of puts you and the customer on the same side of the issue, and you can commiserate over those pain points, and then it also opens up the conversation, and it tells you how to focus your efforts and keep things short, but to the point.
Sure.
And then what's happening in the past few years is there's kind of a new generation of sales, which started with this challenger sales thing.
Yep.
So there's a book called The Challenger Sale, and I got introduced to it by a guy named Mark Crofton, who does the internal sales academy at SAP, which is a software giant.
Yeah.
And they've done a huge company-wide implementation of Challenger Sale, and I think there's like a Harvard Business School case study that they've raised revenues by 30% since implementing Challenger Sale.
Wow.
Which is impressive, right?
Totally. That's huge.
And the basic idea of Challenger Sale, there's two pieces to it. So the first is you figure out what you know that you can teach the customer.
Right.
And it's a little tricky because the customer obviously knows their business better than you do.
Sure.
But what you know is usually you can see across customers. So you can see across an industry or across multiple industries. And you may have some knowledge that the customer doesn't have. And you can really open their eyes to something. And it can happen in one of two ways. It can be stuff that you know, or it can be sort of a industry change. Something is changing out there in the world, and smart companies really, are getting on top of it, whereas companies that don't stand to lose out as the world shifts underneath them.
Yeah.
But either way, you want to kind of paint the picture of, you could get this big reward, but also sort of put this fear into them that they're going to miss out if they don't get with the new program. And then the magic, so you're teaching them something that they don't know, and then kind of the magic of the Challenger Sale is if you can then bring that back into something that you specifically can help them with that other people can't.
Sure, that makes sense.
But in all cases, you're really laying out this learning and providing some value long before you ever talk about yourself. So you're talking about yourself at the end of the presentation, not the beginning.
Yeah, interesting. That makes a lot of sense.
Right. And it's similar to the content marketing strategies that lots of people use, where they're throwing out all this free content. At the end, they're like, and this is me, and come visit my website if you want to learn more.
Right. Well,
so, yeah.
No, in some ways, that's almost what I'm doing with the show, right? Is like I have people on, if people find what we're talking about interesting, they go look up that person or their company or product or service, and then hopefully get more information. And if they're still interested, then they reach out, right? And so it makes a lot of sense, right? That you just put out content and, you're promoting yourself, but you're also teaching people. And, I think a lot of cases it's good to give back too, I think, for at least for me. Like I remember when I was kind of coming up early on in my career, I always, I reached out to people and I said, will you meet me for coffee? I just, want to pick your brain or whatever. Right. And I, not everybody writes back, but the nice thing is the people that do write back. And so now I want to give back to a community that, gave to me kind of coming up. Right. And I think that's super important as well, right? And it's not really necessarily, again, kind of like selling, but it's like teaching. And if you can give back to kind of people that are kind of coming up as well, it might not amount to anything right away. It might come back like a decade later. I've had people, it's like, I saw you here, we talked then. It's like, right? Like, you never know, right? But they remember that, right? And I think that's more valuable than trying to hardcore sell people all the time, is just, trying to give back to this, right? And that's exactly what you're doing with the blog post. And like you said, sometimes that converts into, people that you can mentor, right?
Right.
So,
and I totally agree with you. I love the giving back part of this. It's great. It feels good, and it's nice to be able to offer a little bit of experience to people.
Sure. So I'm curious to know, and it ties directly into kind of this kind of selling, and you kind of mentioned a little bit about sales pitch, but I think important is kind of pricing. And I know you wrote a recent article about pricing. So I'm kind of curious to know, and just for kind of the listener, is how do you kind of price a product, and what are your kind of rationales between picking one price over another price? And then, I'm kind of curious to know your thoughts on pricing.
Right. And, the seed of that article was planted. I was having a conversation with someone who has a product that they made, and they have, they sell to retailers, and the retailers sell to consumers.
Right.
And the retailers love this product, and they're carrying it. And so I was talking to him, and he was like, the retailers love it. I have these features that retailers want that aren't out in the marketplace, and I'm pricing it below my competition. And I said, wait a minute, like, just pick one of those things, right? Like, if you have something that people want, you don't have to price it lower than the competition. You can price it fairly.
Sure.
You don't have to price it more than the competition, but you're essentially leaving money on the table there. And certainly at the beginning of a startup's life, the biggest problem besides time is usually cash.
Okay.
So if you can charge a fair price, that cash is going to be useful, right? It helps you with sales and marketing and team building and all the stuff, product development, all the stuff you need to do. So that was kind of the seed of the article, was like, wait a minute, just pick one, and you're probably better off competing on features than you are on price, because, the best example of competing on price that I've seen is Uber, right?
Okay.
So Uber, for a long time, has had this advantage that they can raise more money than anyone.
Sure.
Maybe they're coming to the end of their ability to do that. I can't predict the future. But, they're priced at $60 billion now, or whatever it is. Sure. And it's just, it just gets harder and harder to raise big chunks of money. But there are other services, right? So I was I was out in New York at dinner on Wednesday night, and someone pulled out this Juno app that I hadn't seen before. But he was like, it's just like Uber, but it's 30% less, right? So, like, and I was thinking about it, like, no one has any loyalty to Uber. Like, I don't care if I use Uber, even in, I'll use Uber, or I'll use Lyft, or now I'll use this Juno thing. I'll just look for whatever's cheaper and who has the closest car.
Sure.
So Uber's been buying they've been getting me to buy from them based on price, but it doesn't build any loyalty. And,
right.
And I don't really care. And, like, that makes me concerned for Uber, right?
Sure.
Because, like, what happens when they can't undercut on price? Or what happens when they have to keep undercutting on price? I mean, I guess you move into self-driving cars, but I don't know what you're really building there in the long term. Granted, Uber has certainly built a successful business, and I'm not disparaging Uber,
Sure.
But it just makes me concerned because, like, who has any loyalty to Uber, right? And I feel like that's what happens when you compete on price.
Yeah, that's really good advice.
So I really feel like if you're winning on features, price yourself fairly and build loyalty through those features. And the converse is Apple, which charges an arm and a leg for everything.
Yep.
But it's great, right? And people are super loyal to Apple.
Yep.
Even though they're paying more than the competitor, like that discount doesn't buy you any loyalty.
Yep.
It's the features and the experience that buy you the loyalty.
Totally. Yeah, I 100% agree.
And then to circle around to your second question about how do you price things, I think one of the books I told you to read was Running Lean by Ash Maurya.
Yeah.
And he's got some great stuff around pricing there. So a couple key things about pricing. One is part of what he wants you to do, and this comes from Steve Blank, who wrote a book called 4 Steps to the Epiphany. Eric Ries, who wrote The Lean Startup, was Steve Blank's student, and then Ash Maurya is building on both Eric Ries and Steve Blank's stuff. But basically, what Steve Blank said was get out of the building. The only thing inside your building are opinions. The facts are out there in the real world, right?
Yep.
So basically go out, interview potential customers, try to really understand their problems, bring along, in the second round of interviews, once you understand the problems, bring around a mock-up of your proposed solution. Don't build anything yet, but bring around something that people can see and understand, and bring around your pricing model. So how did you get to that pricing model? In the first round of interviews, when you were understanding the pain points, you were also asking, how do you solve this problem now, and what do you pay for it, right? Sure. So you start to get a sense, and if people aren't paying to solve a problem, it may not be a good business.
Sure.
Because you're going to have to educate them so you even have to pay to solve the problem. One of the beautiful things about Uber is people were already paying for cabs.
Yep.
So they were used to paying for on-demand transportation, and Uber just came along with a much better solution.
Sure.
But the pricing was always, for Uber, was always based off of the private cars or the cabs. It was always in that same range. And then it eventually became, it's cheaper than the private car, it's cheaper than the cab. But it was always based on what people were already paying. So that's a good place to start, is through your research about, what people are doing to solve the problem now and what they're paying. And then one other thing to keep in mind is that people cannot tell you what they will pay. The only way to validate your pricing model is to get people to actually pay it. And I think that's part of the genius of what Ash Maurya lays out, is in that second round of interviews where you go in with the mock-up and the pricing model, you get people to commit right there. And then when you come back with whatever your version 1 is, they've already pre-committed to buy. Now, granted, that's not the same as buying, but it's pretty close.
Sure.
And you can get people to, he has some quote about, he had 50 paying customers before he ever wrote a line of code. And I think that's genius, right?
Totally. No, totally. I 100% agree. It's interesting. It's kind of a daunting task for people when they're kind of starting out, or it's kind of their first go at a startup. But I don't think there can be any better advice to get than if you can validate your idea based on a mock-up or prototype, and you can get basically paying or almost paying customers, or they'll say, we will pay for this once it's built. That is, nothing validates your idea better than that.
Right. So the sooner you can get their money into your account, the sooner you know that you're on the right path with pricing.
Sure. That's fair enough. And
then you can always tweak it from there.
Do you have any thoughts or experience on even getting people to pay when it's still a prototype before it even kind of is launched? Is that even a thing that you could potentially do, have paying customers before they're even really able to use it?
I've done it. I've done it essentially for custom software projects.
Yeah.
So the short answer is yes.
Okay.
And I think in today's world, Kickstarter is the best example of that.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
You go to Kickstarter to get people to pay you for something you haven't built yet.
Right.
So the short answer is yes.
Okay. And I guess like I remember even like Mark Cuban starting his first computer business. He like I remember reading his book or one of his books years ago, and it was like he basically told the guy that his first consulting job or whatever it was, he was like, it's going to be like $500 or something. It doesn't really matter the amount. And he said, like, if I don't deliver, I'll give you your $500 back. And like he delivered. But you know what I mean? Like, so it can be done. And I think a lot of people are almost scared to kind of ask for money, even when they have like a launched version 1, right? Mm-hmm. But I think the point I'm trying to get across is that there's people doing it before they even, like you said, write a line of code.
Right. And I think the successful entrepreneurs make money. I mean, I know that sounds so dumb,
no,
but like I can't tell you how many people I talk to who aren't trying to make money. Like, it's weird. It's like they're running some weird kind of charity instead of a business.
Yep.
I got into an argument with an entrepreneur one time because he was fighting to not put a line in his financial model for his own salary because that would throw off the numbers.
Really?
And I was like, you are planning to never pay yourself. Like, that's not a business. And so for me, I firmly believe in making money. Sure. And I firmly believe in making money as soon as possible. And I don't love business plans that go a really long time without making money. Now, that means I miss out on things like Facebook, which obviously is a monster. And because they were building essentially an advertising platform, they needed tens of millions of eyeballs, and they had to do stuff for free for a very long time.
Sure. But that's almost like winning the lottery, right? Like trying to find one of those. It is almost
like winning the lottery.
Right? Like, so I know like everybody wants to build the next Facebook or Google or Apple or Instagram, or the list goes on and on, right? But like actually being able to find that or come up with that idea is a lot of times those companies didn't even start out to become what they became. Like Facebook was started in like at a college campus, like in his dorm room, right? Like he never planned on it being one of the biggest internet companies of all time, or companies of all time for that matter, right? And so like it's so hard that people are like, I'm going to be the next Facebook. It's like, sure you are, because Facebook was never thought they would be Facebook, right?
Right. And some companies have done it. Like Instagram has done it. Sure. Twitter did it. WhatsApp has done it.
Yep.
Snapchat has done it. You know, like it's doable. And actually, Peter Thiel had a great, I forget where it was, but he was talking about why he invested in Facebook, right?
Okay.
And he's like, look, when they came to me, their big problem was that they were so popular that their servers were breaking and they needed money to improve their server capacity. And so he's like, it was really a no-brainer.
Sure.
Right? Like they weren't coming to me and saying, we want to build this and it'll be successful one day. They were coming and saying, we're already so successful that we just need money to keep up with demand.
Sure.
And so that's why he invested, right? So I do believe that if you have built something that's that popular, by all means, give it away for free and then monetize it on the back end.
Right.
But if it's not so popular that your servers are breaking, you may need to figure out a way to make money soon.
Fair enough. I know it's interesting because I meet even just like, because I do pre-interviews before I have anybody on the show, and you know there's a bunch of people that you know I've done pre-interviews with, and we kind of get to that business. As I always ask, like, how do you monetize this? And a lot of times I'm like, no, like you. Like, I don't mean to be mean or like a jerk or anything, but it's like I can't have you on the show to talk about something that I don't think is ever going to generate money, and you have no intention of ever making any money, because it's like, how do I have you on the show to give advice about being successful when you're not successful, and I don't think you're going to be successful, and you're not planning on being successful?
Right.
Like it's a weird thing, and so. To your point, I think it makes a lot of sense, right? And I'm sure we've anybody that ever works or knows how to write code or fix a computer always gets asked at a party, like, oh, I got the next Facebook idea. We're going to go 50-50. I get 50% because I just told you the idea, and you're going to get the other 50%, and you're going to have to go build it. It's like, huh?
Right.
I'm sure you've gotten that too, right? It's like, well, it's a lot more complicated than just, that, right? It's like there's so many things that go into running a successful, profitable startup that people don't understand, especially people that aren't technical.
Right.
And do you find then, I'm curious, do you find that when people don't have a business model, more time than not, they're a non-technical founder, or they are technical, or a bit of both, or what's your experience with that?
It tends to be non-technical.
Okay.
I mean, it's not that simple, but yes, a lot of the times when I get that, it's just non-technical founders.
Got you. Okay, that's interesting. That's kind of what I guess I would have suspected, right? Because just they don't, and it's not their own, like, it's just they've never been in the trenches kind of building this stuff or really understand how complicated and time-consuming that building some of this stuff is or isn't, right, for that matter.
Right. And I think that's where Ash Moria and Eric Ries and Steve Blank all make a good point, is like, really, you shouldn't be building anything. And I think especially non-technical people, well, and technical people, I think the entrepreneur's first instinct is to go build something, and then when it's perfect, bring it out to the world.
Sure.
And that is an expensive waste.
Totally.
Because really where things succeed are the intersection between the vision and how other people actually behave. And so it brings us back to, the only thing in the building is your opinions, and you've got to get out in the real world to really understand, how the world works and what people actually do and what they actually value.
Yep.
And what they'll actually pay. Like, where is the value to them?
No, that's fair. And like, the one thing that I really resonated with me recently is, I do kind of a bunch of stuff in kind of the enterprise software space. Like we usually work in that kind of space. And it wasn't actually on a call. It was a video WebEx recording. And we built like a rough prototype for a partnered company that we're working with. And they were demoing this like rough prototype. Like it kind of worked, but it was very much like early beta. You could probably even say like maybe even alpha. And literally the lady on the other line was like, I hate what we're currently using so much that we're paying a large subscription for yearly, that I will sit with your team of developers and go like feature by feature to just like build something that replaces what I'm currently using. And like what they're looking to do isn't that complicated, and to be fair, isn't really that sexy. But what really resonated to me about that was, if you can really solve somebody's problem, you can make a lot of money doing that. And it might not be the sexiest product or service, but at least for me, what I like about it is I really like software that solves a real problem for real people. And I also really like I like that technical challenge. Like for me, it doesn't really matter what the piece of software actually does. It's just being able to like technically solve that problem, right? And I think that's, to me, the fun part of being involved in startups. And I think if you look outside kind of the maybe like the trendy, sexy kind of apps and actually really try to solve real problems for clients or, other kind of, friends or like your clients, you never know what piece of software you can kind of build to solve one of their really big pain points, right?
Right. And what makes Uber successful is not their software.
Sure.
What makes Uber successful is it's a really easy way to get a car on demand.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
Like it's the problem that is solved for me. I don't care how Uber does it.
Exactly.
Like if it was, if it was guys standing on corners with cars, that's fine with me too.
Yep. And like if somebody would have came to you early before Uber was a thing and said like, I'm basically making an app that gets you a car, you're kind of like, well, that's not really that cool or interesting because it's kind of been done. But how they did it and the execution of it and kind of just how, like, right, they build a whole business around something that really isn't that sexy if you actually analyze it for being this like cool hip company. It's kind of become that in the media's kind of eye, but if you actually look at it, it's really not that complicated and it's really not that sexy of like an actual product, right? And I'm not trying to bash on them. I'm just trying to say, like,
oh, you're right.
And that's, I guess, the point I'm trying to get across with all this stuff, that there's a lot of things to actually build to solve a lot of really good problems and make it better for people, right? When people are just annoyed with, I don't know, like trying to catch a cab, if I can just tell my phone to get me a car and pick me up, that's better than kind of trying to hail a cab in rush hour or whatever, or you're coming home from the bar or whatever, right? If you just poke at your phone, it's easier. And that solves a real problem for people. And that's kind of what that lady through that webinar was basically saying. Like, look, like, I hate what I have so bad that I will tell somebody, like, just fix my problem. And I will, and it's not really, and I love that about kind of the software space. And I know I just took up like a bunch of our time just ranting, but I think
awesome.
that's important.
You got like passionate. That's good. I like to hear it.
Yeah, I love it though.
And I had someone.
Go ahead.
I had someone tell me the same thing last week. I was in a conversation with someone, and he was like, "Look, most money gets made on non-sexy businesses."
Yep. Yeah.
So it's funny to hear you saying it too, but it's true. Like it's problem solving. It's not sexiness.
Yeah, and you can make money trying to build like a sexy like Snapchat or Instagram or whatever. Obviously, it's been done, but I think you're gonna have an easier time trying to solve a non-sexier problem than you are trying to build something that billions of people are going to use, right?
Yep.
So I don't know. We are kind of running out of time, Mike. So I think we should maybe close the show with where people can find more information about yourself and, anything else you want to kind of mention before we end this thing.
Yeah. So everything I have is online at mikelingle.com, MikeLingle. And if anyone's interested in the accelerator stuff, Venture Hive is based in Miami. They're a great resource. And I guess just, and your show is awesome. So people should definitely check that out and listen to more of the interviews that you do.
Yeah, and you can visit any of the past interviews I've done with yourself at buildingthefutureshow.com. All right, Mike. Well, thanks again for doing this. I'm sure we'll do another one at some point. Thanks again for doing this, and I look forward to kind of keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks so much. I always enjoy our conversation.
All right, man. We'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Kevin.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. The music for the show is done by Electric Mantra. You can check them out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.